Moment my brother looked across the table at me and said, "She's been carrying us for 2 years, Dad. She paid the rent, the car note, the electric bill, all of it." I watched my father's face go completely still. Not embarrassed, not grateful. Still, like he was deciding which version of the truth he was willing to live with. He chose the wrong one. "I don't know what he's talking about," my father said. He looked at my mother, then at the other people sitting around that table. My aunt, my cousin, my brother's girlfriend who had only met our family twice. "I really don't know what he means." I had driven 4 hours to get there. I had taken a Friday off work. I was sitting in a banquet hall with a white tablecloth and little glass votives on every table because my sister had just gotten engaged. And my parents had insisted we all come celebrate together, like the family we pretended to be. And my father was looking me in the eye and telling me he didn't know what we were talking about. That was the moment I stopped being afraid of him. I should tell you how we got there. I'm 31 now. I was 28 when this started, living in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a one-bedroom apartment I shared with a woman I'd found on a housing app. I was working as a medical billing specialist for a hospital group, making decent money for the first time in my life. Not rich. Not comfortable in that easy way where you don't check your bank account before you go to the grocery store, but stable, genuinely stable, for the first time since college. My parents live in Columbus, Ohio. My sister, she's 2 years older than me, lives about 20 minutes from them. My brother is in Pittsburgh, roughly halfway between all of us. Growing up, my sister was the one everyone talked about. She was the athlete, the honor roll kid, the one who got a partial scholarship and came home every summer with a new award or a new achievement or a new story that made my parents beam. I was the one who liked to read, who took the long way around to everything, who got B's when she was getting A's and got quiet when she was getting loud. My mother used to say I was thoughtful. My father used to say I was in my own world. Neither of them meant it as a compliment. I don't want to spend too much time on childhood because this isn't really a story about childhood. It's a story about what happens when you spend your whole life being the one who stays quiet, and then one day you realize that staying quiet was never actually an option. It was just something you chose, and you can unchoose it. But I'll say this, I knew by the time I was in high school that I was not my parents' favorite. I'm not saying that to be dramatic. I'm saying it the way you say a factual thing. The sky is blue. My parents preferred my sister. I learned to live with it. My sister got a car for her 17th birthday. I got a card and a $20 bill and a comment about how I really needed to work on my confidence. My sister's college tuition was paid in full. I took out loans and worked part-time and came home for Thanksgiving already exhausted. Nobody asked how I was doing. They asked how my sister's internship was going. I got used to it. That's the thing about these dynamics. You don't sit there and say, "I am being treated unfairly." You just slowly build your entire personality around the assumption that you will not be chosen, and you start finding ways to be okay with that. I moved to Charlotte after college because I needed to get out, not dramatically, no tearful goodbye, no slam doors. I just quietly applied for jobs in a city 4 hours away, got one, gave my notice on my apartment, and left. My mother cried. My father said, "Well, you always did do things your own way." My sister texted me a heart emoji. I was 24, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. The first call came about 3 years after I moved. It was a Thursday evening. I was making pasta and watching something on my laptop when my mother's name lit up my phone. We talked occasionally. Birthdays, holidays, the periodic check-in that felt more like a welfare visit than an actual conversation. I picked up. She got to the point faster than I expected. There had been some problems, she said. My father's hours had been cut at the plant. He worked in manufacturing, had been with the same company for 18 years. The cut wasn't a layoff, just a reduction, but it had hit them harder than they expected. And they were behind on the rent. I want to be clear about something. My parents owned their home for 20 years. They sold it when I was in college and downsized to a rental because my father's knees were bad and they didn't want to deal with maintenance. The rental they chose was in a nice part of Columbus. Nicer than they needed, in my opinion, and the rent was $1,650 a month. "How much are you short?" I asked. "Just the 1 month," my mother said. "Just to get through this. His hours should be back up by next pay period." I sent her $1,650 that Friday. I told myself it was a one-time thing. It was not a one-time thing. The calls kept coming. Not every month, that would have been too obvious, too easy to say no to. It was every 2 or 3 months, enough time in between that each one felt like a separate emergency rather than a pattern. My father's hours went back up and then came down again. There was a car repair. There was a medical bill that insurance didn't fully cover. There was a month where the heat pump broke and the landlord was slow to fix it and they needed to cover the cost up front and get reimbursed. Each time, it was just this once. Each time, I said yes. I want you to understand what was happening to my finances during this period. I was sending between $800 and $2,000 every few months. My savings, which I had been building slowly and carefully since I moved to Charlotte, started to shrink. I had been putting away money for a down payment on a condo. That goal kept moving further out. I started declining things, a trip with friends, a new laptop when mine started dying, a gym membership I'd been meaning to get. I told myself these were small sacrifices. I told myself it was family. What I didn't tell myself, what I didn't let myself think too clearly, was that nobody was asking my sister to help. I found that out by accident about 18 months into the pattern. I was on the phone with my brother, just talking, and he mentioned offhand that my sister had gotten a bonus at work, a substantial one, and had used it to take a trip to Europe with her boyfriend. Good for her, I said. Because what else do you say? Yeah, my brother said. He paused. Does she ever? I mean, do you know if she helps out with mom and dad? I asked him what he meant. He got quiet for a second, then said, I just know you've been helping them. Mom mentioned it. I didn't know if your sister was doing the same. She wasn't. I knew it before he finished the sentence. I knew it the way you know something you've been carefully not knowing. My sister was buying European flights, and I was sending my mother rent money, and somehow, in my parents' minds, we were both equally beloved. I got off the phone with my brother and sat in my apartment for a long time. I didn't cry. I was past crying about this particular thing. I just sat there and did the math. By that point, I had sent my parents approximately $14,000 over 18 months. I had no idea what the total would be by the time it was over. I didn't know it was going to go on much longer. My sister got engaged 11 months later. His name is Griffin. He's an actuary. Steady and quiet. The kind of man who arrives on time and remembers your coffee order. I genuinely like him. This is important because what happened at their engagement dinner had nothing to do with him, and I don't want anyone to think otherwise. My mother called me 2 days after the proposal to tell me the news. She was ecstatic. My sister was engaged. They were going to do a celebratory dinner. Could I come to Columbus? Not Charlotte, Columbus, because that's where my sister lives, where my parents live, where everyone who matters apparently lives. I said yes. I took the Friday off, packed a bag, drove 4 hours. The dinner was at a restaurant my sister had chosen. A nice Italian place in the Short North neighborhood. The kind with cloth napkins and a cocktail menu and entrees over $30. There were about 14 of us, my parents, my sister, and Griffin's parents, my brother and his girlfriend, a few of my sister's closest friends, my aunt and one cousin. I want to tell you exactly what happened in order, because the sequence matters. We were about halfway through the meal. The appetizers had been cleared, the wine was flowing, and my sister was talking about venues. They were thinking a fall wedding the following year, maybe something outdoor, maybe in wine country if the budget worked out. My parents were lit up in a way I hadn't seen them in years. My mother kept reaching over to squeeze my sister's hand. My father turned to the table and made a toast. He talked about my sister, about how proud he was, how she had always been extraordinary, how she had gotten everything she worked for because she was the kind of person who deserved everything life had to offer. And then he looked at me and he said, It's funny, you two grew up in the same house, had the same opportunities, and look how differently things turned out. He meant it as an observation. I could tell he genuinely thought it was a neutral thing to say. The table got a little quiet. Griffin's mother smiled uncertainly. My brother set down his fork. My mother jumped in, the way she always did when my father said something that landed wrong. What he means is, every child is their own person. Of course, my father agreed, in that cheerful, unaware voice. I just mean, some people find their path, and some people are still figuring it out. And that's fine, that's completely fine. He was talking about me. He was talking about me at my sister's engagement dinner to a table full of people with my 2.5 years of transferred money sitting in his bank account. I put my fork down. My brother was watching me. He gave me the smallest shake of his head. Not don't say anything. More like I'm sorry this is happening. I picked up my wine glass. I took one sip. And then I said, very calmly, I'm glad you're proud of her, Dad. I hope she's planning to help cover your rent now, though, because I've been doing it for the last 2.5 years, and I think it's probably time for a change. The table went completely still. My sister looked at me. My father looked at me. My mother's hand stopped moving. And then my father said it, the thing that I will carry with me for the rest of my life, not because it hurt me, but because it showed me exactly who he was. He said, I don't know what you're talking about. There was a long pause, the kind that doesn't feel like silence. It feels like everyone in the room holding their breath at exactly the same time. Griffin reached over and quietly topped off his own wine glass. I respected that. Dad, I said, you called me in April of 2 years ago and asked me to cover your rent because you were short. I sent $1,650 to Mom's account the next morning. That's where we started. I don't recall that, he said. He said it with such certainty. That's what I remember. Not embarrassed, not flustered. Certain. Like he had decided the story wasn't true and conviction alone would make it so. My brother spoke then, quietly, like he was trying not to spill anything. She sent me the receipts, Dad. When I asked her about it, I've seen the transfers. My mother made a small sound. Not words, just a sound. I kept records, I said. Every transfer, every date, every amount. The messages before each one where you told me what it was for. 31 transfers over 2.5 years. The total is a little over $38,000. The number landed on the table like something physical. My sister said, What? I looked at her. I want to be clear. She genuinely hadn't known. I could see it on her face, not guilt, but shock. She turned to my parents, and I watched her process it in real time, the way her expression moved through disbelief, and then something slower and harder. You asked her for money, my sister said to my parents. It wasn't a question. My father said, This is not the place for this conversation. Okay, I said. Then I'll say just one more thing and we can move on. I looked at him directly. You stood up 30 seconds ago and told this entire table that the difference between your daughters is that one of them found her path. I've been finding mine while also quietly keeping yours stable for 2.5 years. I don't need credit for that, but I will not sit here and let you rewrite what happened. I picked up my fork and went back to my pasta. Nobody said anything for almost a full minute. Then Griffin's father cleared his throat and asked my brother if he'd caught any of the playoff games, and slowly, awkwardly, the table came back to life. My father didn't speak to me for the rest of the dinner. I drove back to Charlotte the next morning. My brother called me when I was about an hour outside of Columbus. He said, For what it's worth, I think you said exactly what needed to be said. I'm not sure this fixes anything, I told him. It doesn't have to fix anything, he said. It just has to be true. I thought about that for a long time after I got home. My sister called me 3 days later. We talked for almost 2 hours, longer than we talked in years. She told me she hadn't known about the money, which I believed. She told me she was angry at our parents, which surprised me. She said she'd had a long conversation with Griffin about it, and with my mother, and that my mother had cried and said she hadn't realized how much it was adding up to. I told her I didn't know if I believed that, but I wasn't going to fight about it. What do you want? My sister asked me. Like, what would actually help you feel okay about this? I thought about it for a while. Honestly, I want to stop being the person who says yes, because she's afraid of what happens if she says no. I've been doing that my whole life. I think I just needed to hear myself say out loud that I've been doing it. My sister was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. That meant more to me than anything my parents could have said. My father eventually called about 2 weeks after the dinner. He said he wanted to talk. He didn't apologize, exactly. He said he may have let things go on too long without addressing them properly, which is the closest my father has ever come to admitting fault about anything. I told him I appreciated him calling. I told him I wasn't going to be sending money anymore. He said he understood. I don't know if he actually understood. I'm not sure it matters. I've been thinking a lot about what it costs to be the quiet one. Not just financially, though $38,000 is not a small number, and I'll be rebuilding that savings for a while. But the other cost, the one that's harder to account for, all the years I spent believing that staying small was a form of kindness. That if I just kept my head down and helped out and didn't make anything difficult, eventually someone would notice and say, "Hey, we see you. Hey, you matter too." They didn't. And that's okay. Not because it wasn't painful, but because waiting for them to say it was never going to work. The moment I stopped waiting was the moment I could actually start living in the life I'd built. I'm not looking for anyone to tell me I was right or wrong at that dinner table. I know some people would have handled it differently, more privately, maybe more gracefully. I understand that, but I also know that I had sat quietly at hundreds of family tables before that one, and every time I left those dinners feeling like I had disappeared a little more. I didn't disappear that night. I paid my half of the restaurant bill, said goodbye to Griffin's parents, hugged my sister, and walked out into the parking lot. It was a cold November evening, and I stood next to my car for a second and looked up at the sky, dark and clear, the way Ohio skies get in late fall. And I thought, I have 4 hours ahead of me and a life waiting on the other end of them, and I built that life myself, quietly, without anyone's help, and it's good. It's genuinely good. I got in the car and I drove home. If you've been listening to this and you recognize something in it, the feeling of being the one who gives without being asked, who stays quiet to keep the peace, who has been so busy managing everyone else's needs that you forgot to protect your own. I want you to know that the moment you stop is not the end of something. It's just the beginning of you finally being able to see what you actually have. Thank you for being here, and wherever you're listening from, I hope you know that your quiet sacrifices don't define your worth. You do. I've thought a lot about what my father said that night. Not the denial, but the toast. The way he stood up in that restaurant and talked about how some people find their path and some people don't, as if he were stating something obvious and kind, as if the words weren't landing directly on me while my money was sitting in his bank account. What I've come to understand is that people like my father don't usually know they're doing it. That's not an excuse. It's just something I had to reckon with, because the alternative was spending the rest of my life being angry at a man who might genuinely not have seen the full picture of what he was doing. The calls for help, the gratitude, the comparisons, they can all exist in the same person without that person ever connecting them into a coherent pattern. That's a failure of self-honesty, and it has consequences. It had consequences for me. The $38,000 is a real number. I don't say it to be dramatic. I say it because for a long time I didn't let myself say it at all, and not naming it was part of what kept me stuck. When you don't name the thing, you can't make a decision about it. You just keep going, one transfer at a time, telling yourself it's not that much, it's family, it's what you do. But here's what I've learned about that kind of thinking. It doesn't come from love. It comes from fear. I was afraid that if I said no, I would be proven right about something I had always suspected, that I was the one they could afford to lose. Saying yes kept that question at bay. It let me pretend the dynamic was different than it was. What changed for me at that dinner table wasn't courage exactly. It was clarity. I had spent 2.5 years in a story where I was the quiet one, the helper, the one who didn't make waves. And then my father told a room full of people that some people find their path and some don't, and something in me just finished. Not in an angry way, in a done way, the kind of done that doesn't need to raise its voice. My brother showed up that night in a way I hadn't expected, and I won't forget that. My sister, too. The call we had 3 days later was one of the most honest conversations we'd ever had. Those relationships survived because they were built on something real. The one with my father is still being rebuilt. Slowly, on terms that I have a say in now. I think the hardest thing about being the one who gives quietly is that you start to believe the quiet is the point. Like the sacrifice is supposed to be invisible, and if you ever name it, you've done something wrong. But invisibility isn't humility. It's just a way of disappearing. I don't want to disappear anymore. I don't think you should either.